Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first episode of this walk through the book of Luke. I got to tell you, I can't wait. I couldn't be more excited that you are joining me as we walk through what I think is the most important book of the Bible. And here's why I think that. It contains the most personal and intimate biography of the life of Jesus that's ever been written. Now, if you are new to reading the Bible, or maybe you've attempted to read it alone before, I'm guessing that didn't go so well. And I need you to know, I get it. The Bible is a big, intimidating, and sometimes complicated book. Here's what we want to do. We want to make it easy for you. We've broken the book of Luke into bite-sized pieces, and my hope is that together we'll walk through the life of Jesus and uncover who Jesus was to the author of Luke. And ultimately, here's my hope. It will deepen your faith in God, who sent this man named Jesus some 2,000 years ago and is still influencing the lives of people like you and me today. Now, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to give away the ending of this study before we even begin. Once you read the book of Luke from beginning to end, here's what you'll discover. We have a God who shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word. Let me say that again. We have a God who shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word. And today, we see it unfolding from the very beginning of the story. Luke chapter 1. Now, if you haven't read chapter 1, stop this video and read it right now. Because what I'm about to share with you, it's not going to make any sense if you don't read it first. Even in the introduction to the author's take on Jesus' life, we begin to see how God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word. The first 4 verses of the book of Luke are easy to skip, but they're actually golden. Don't miss this. In those first few verses, we're reminded that every book of the Bible was written by a real human author, and each had their own intent for writing. The first few verses of Luke remind us that the author was writing likely 30 to 45 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And he's writing to someone named Theophilus. Now, unfortunately, we don't know exactly who he is, but we know what his name means. It means lover of God. Many believe he was a non-Jew. In that day and age, non-Jews were called Gentiles. Gentiles were seen as impure, unworthy outsiders who didn't deserve God's attention. Historians suggest that Theophilus was uniquely one of the many Gentiles who had heard about Jesus and were drawn to his message, but was also attracted to the theology and the principles of Judaism. So one of the author's motives for writing the book of Luke was to tell the story in such a way that draws Theophilus and other traditionally non-religious Gentiles into the story of Jesus, and ultimately the story of God's love for them. God's promises weren't limited to a few. This was a story of a God coming into the world in order to show God's love for all people. Here's that theme. God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word, even for people who didn't believe they were worthy or included in God's story. Now, that's a little bit about Theophilus, but we might ask, who was the author of the book of Luke? Now, many believe the author of Luke was a traveling companion of a man named Paul. In Paul's letters to the Colossians, he says, he calls Luke the beloved physician. And if this indeed is who the author of Luke was, he was born in Antioch, which is in southernmost Turkey today. Now, this is really interesting because this would make the author of Luke the only non-Jewish author of any of the New Testament. Again, here's that theme. God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word, even for people who didn't believe they were worthy or included in God's story. Now, some speculate that the author was actually paid by this man Theophilus to write an orderly account of the life of Jesus. This makes the author of Luke sort of a spiritual journalist, if you will. He says, I've investigated everything carefully. I've talked to the eyewitnesses. I'm writing this down so you can know for sure what you've been taught. Luke's writing to make sure that Theophilus knows that his faith is grounded in real people, real stories, and a real God who keeps God's word. Now, if you were to sit down and write an orderly account of someone's life, where would you start? Likely, you'd start at their birth story. But the author of Luke doesn't start there at all. He seems to say the story of Jesus isn't complete unless you hear the backstory. And so he jumps back, way back, to a temple, to an old priest and a prayer that seems unanswered for years. The story starts with Zechariah and Elizabeth. They're good, faithful people, but they're unable to have children. And back then, that wasn't just sad, it was shameful. Sadly, in the absence of scientific knowledge about how conceiving a child works, in that ancient world, a couple's inability to conceive a child was seen as God's judgment against them. But one day, while Zechariah is in the temple, boom, an angel shows up with a message. He says, Zechariah and Elizabeth, your prayers have been heard. And guess what? 9 months later, Elizabeth would give birth to John, the one who would prepare the way for the Messiah. Here's that theme again. God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word, even for people who thought God had forgotten all about them. Now fast forward 6 months, and the same angel shows up again, this time in that scuzzy backwater town of Nazareth. A town people said nothing good could possibly come from there. The angel appeared to that teenage girl named Mary. The angel Gabriel then drops the big announcement. You're going to give birth to the Son of God. Mary is stunned. But when it comes to her response, did you notice? She doesn't doubt. There's no fear. Rather, her response is filled with faith. She says, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Now let's pause right there. Imagine Mary's situation. Mary didn't know how it would work. She didn't have all the answers, but she trusted. She trusted the one who gave the promise. And that's what's at the heart of Luke chapter 1. And honestly, God is faithful. God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word, even when the path forward is unclear. That's throughout the first chapter of the book of Luke. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you're in a season like Elizabeth and Zechariah. You're wondering if God sees you or hears anything you say to God. Or maybe you're like Mary. You're feeling overwhelmed. You're just uncertain. Or maybe you're like Theophilus. You just want something solid to stand on. Wherever you are, Luke starts with this reminder: God has not forgotten you. His promises are always in motion. God shows up, speaks up, and keeps God's word. You just might not see the whole picture yet. Gang, that's all for today. But don't miss the next episode, when we'll take a look at the Christmas story and the unexpected characters who are part of God's story from the very beginning. And until then, I'd like you to consider a couple of questions. The first goes like this: when have you, like Zechariah and Elizabeth, faced uncertainty? And in the midst of that uncertainty, how can you remind yourself that God's promises are still in motion, even if you can't see it yet? And secondly, here's the second question. Mary responded to God's surprising announcement with faith, even without knowing all the details. During those moments in your life where the future isn't always clear, how do you trust God's never-failing promises?